Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. The president of Lithuania, Gitanas Nauseda, stated that the Baltic Sea is turning into a battleground and that Russia is deliberately escalating the situation in the Baltic in order to take revenge on Estonia and other Baltic states. This statement by the President of the Republic of Lithuania came against the backdrop of several recent incidents in the Baltic Sea. As is known, the Estonian Navy attempted to stop a tanker that was passing through international waters in the Gulf of Finland en route to the Russian port of Primorsk. Observers note that this vessel may belong to the so-called shadow fleet of the Russian Federation, which the West is fighting against in an effort to enforce energy sanctions against the Russian Federation. However, just a few days later, it was Russian law enforcement who detained a Greek tanker that had departed from the Estonian port of Sillamäe and was heading toward Rotterdam through Russian territorial waters along a route that had been previously agreed upon with the Russian authorities. There was no doubt that the detention of the tanker, a completely legal vessel transporting a cargo of shale oil, was an act of revenge against Estonia for its attempt to stop a tanker from the Russian shadow fleet. And it is clear that the situation will only continue to deteriorate with each new day of confrontation between the countries of the European Union and the Russian Federation, with every new day of Russia's war against Ukraine. The president of Lithuania says that there are risks that everything could end quite badly, with human casualties and other dangerous consequences resulting from Moscow's actions in the Baltic. This is a deliberate policy by Russia, which it demonstrates not only at sea, but also on land and in the air, not at the head of the Lithuanian state. Here, it is important to understand a rather simple thing. When Finland and Sweden, after the start of Russia's so-called Great War against Ukraine, decided to join NATO, the entire Baltic Sea essentially became an internal sea of the North Atlantic Alliance. As a result, the Russian Federation is currently left with only the ports located exclusively in Russia's Kaliningrad region, which is a strategically important area where the Baltic fleet of the Russian Navy is also notably stationed. However, the significance of an internal sea lies primarily in Euro-Atlantic solidarity, above all in the readiness to defend every inch of NATO territory. As former US President Joseph Biden stated, and as we know, the current President of the United States, Donald Trump, especially avoids mentioning, who moreover has called the Baltic a complicated region. And this statement by the American president is a kind of invitation to execution. It demonstrates that Washington is unlikely to take any decisive action if Russia starts acting aggressively in the Baltic. So it turns out that on the one hand, the Baltic Sea is controlled by NATO countries' forces, but on the other hand, Russia can allow itself any kind of mischief without fearing serious actions from other countries, knowing that the United States is unlikely to come to the aid of its allies if the Russian Federation takes any decisive confrontational actions in the Baltic. Moreover, there is a real danger of provocations by Russia, not only at sea, but also on land. It is worth remembering that Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania all share borders with the Russian Federation, and Lithuania also borders Russia's Kaliningrad region, which the Kremlin is turning into a genuine military base situated between two NATO and European Union member states, Lithuania and Poland. And that is why the risk of confrontation is quite high. If a conflict of this kind arises in the Baltic Sea, it is possible that the armed forces of the Russian Federation will try to support it with actions on land, which is exactly what the President of the Republic of Lithuania is talking about. Previously, when the European countries had the United States behind them with its armed forces and nuclear capabilities, there was at least some confidence that Russia would not be willing to take decisive action. Now, after every phone conversation between the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, it becomes clear that Trump could abandon Europe to its fate at any moment, and moreover blame European leaders for provoking a conflict with his favorite in the Russian capital. And Putin is beginning to feel more and more confident and uninhibited in Europe and the Baltics. This means that it is precisely thanks to Donald Trump's arrival in the Oval Office that the Baltic Sea is turning into a new sea of war and potential confrontation between Russia, the NATO member countries, and the Russian Federation. The incidents we have currently observed in the Baltic Sea, involving both the Estonian Navy and the Russian Federation security forces, are already creating a potential scenario for how such events might possibly unfold in the near future. At the same time, it is absolutely clear that unlike a land war, which the Russian Federation's armed forces would still need to prepare for after several years of a bloody and difficult war in Ukraine for the Russian army. Additional preparation time is needed to organize numerous provocations in the Baltic. In this context, the Baltic Fleet, through its provocative actions, can in a way make up for the activity of the Russian Federation's Black Sea Fleet, which, after a series of successful operations by Ukrainian defense forces, is now in a semi-paralyzed state and is even afraid to stick its nose out of the Novorossiysk harbor. So, considering that provocations remain one of the most important political tools of Russia's political leadership, and now there is also a need to test how far Donald Trump is willing to go in his readiness to disregard the United States' allied commitments and demonstrate loyalty toward Putin, actions in the Baltic that could lead to serious military clashes both at sea and on land are an almost inevitable development. Unless, of course, the White House returns to a policy of Euro-Atlantic solidarity and recognizes the danger that Russia poses not only when it attacks Ukraine, but also when it prepares for new provocations in Europe. However, to suspect that Donald Trump will, at some point in his political career, stumble upon prudence somewhere in the corridors of the Oval Office is to write yet another work of political science fiction stories that are unlikely to reassure or give hope to anyone in Europe. Thank you, friends. Stay tuned to this channel and subscribe to it. Subscribe to my social media as well as to my channels on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee and Donatello, which helps support the development of these resources. Make use of the sponsorship feature right here on YouTube. Peace to you all.